That's a good reminder, because the first thing to say is that it is being recorded. So just to keep that in mind. In terms of the other things to remember, if you want to have sort of enter anything in general conversation, we would ask you to use the chat function. If you want to ask any of the speakers or panelists a question, we would ask you to use the Q&A function in Zoom, and I will be keeping an eye on that as chair of this session, and there is time at the end for questions and answers. So with that, I think we can start the presentations. And I am the first one to go. So just for the benefit of those of you who maybe aren't familiar with the SIMAtlantic project, I want to give a very quick overview. I know most people will know this, but hopefully it's just a refresher for those that do. So the project is about supporting the implementation of maritime spatial planning in the Atlantic region, and it really had two concrete actions: to build capacity and to establish lasting mechanisms. And I think really they have come about because of the partnership in the project. We have a variety of partners, which you'll see in the next slide, and that has really helped us to design work and program work in the project that would really help the implementation of MSP. All the deliverables and the outputs from the project have been designed in such a way so as they're transferable to other parts of the Atlantic region, but also to other sea basin areas. So we would like people to use what we've produced, and hopefully it will help them to implement MSP and also help them with their cross-border cooperation or their work on transboundary aspects. So just in terms of how the project was designed, we were very lucky in designing this project that we had such a variety of partners, because we have competent authorities, we have public bodies that are tasked with supporting competent authorities in providing technical input or scientific advice, and we also have a range of universities and research centres. So it's quite a nice partnership. And what we wanted to do, building on what I said in the last slide, was that implementation aspect and supporting implementation. So it was important to have practical examples where we could apply our knowledge and make sure it worked. Then take that practical knowledge, see how it relates to wider cross-cutting themes, and use the information from those case studies and the cross-cutting themes to develop a vision for MSP in the Atlantic. And today's event focuses on each of those building blocks, and they're reflected in the sessions. So just to give you an idea of the case studies, these are the 4 case studies. You'll see that they cover a range of different aspects of MSP, so everything from transboundary management to communication, impact assessment, and land-sea interactions. And those relate to the wider cross-cutting themes, as I mentioned. The cross-cutting themes were governance, cumulative effects or impacts in SEA, data use and sharing, and land-sea interaction. So there's a nice link between the case studies and the cross-cutting themes. And to tie that information together and couple it with, I suppose, relevant information for MSP and the current uses of the Atlantic area, we'll tie that together in an Atlantic vision, which you'll hear more about this morning. And that really is one of the key outputs from the project, because we know we can't have an MSP or a marine spatial plan for the entire Atlantic area, but there's probably areas that benefit from cooperation and from joint approaches. And that's really what the project was seeking to do. So in terms of today's event, the whole purpose of it is to share our learnings and best practice from other areas as well, to assist in shaping future cooperation and coherence in MSP. And even though it's quite a formal setup with Zoom and different sessions, we do want it to be as informal as possible. So we want to get you to participate as the audience. The sessions have been designed for audience participation. There'll be different technologies in use to do that, which you'll hear more about in the session. But this first session this morning is really about setting the context and thinking about how you go about developing a vision for MSP in the Atlantic region. So that's all I'm going to say for now. I would like to introduce the first set of speakers, and they're both in the SIMAtlantic project. So we have Julian de Lesser from the SIRIMA Centre for Studies and Expertise on Risks, the Environment, Mobility and Urban Planning. I hope I've got that title right. I think SIRIMA is easier. Based in France, Julian works on MSP projects within SIRIMA. And he's accompanied by Cristina Cervera Nunes from the Spanish Institute of Oceanography. And Cristina has a background in environmental science as well as marine spatial planning. So they're going to talk about current and future uses and needs of the Atlantic region. Over to you, Julian.
Thanks, Anne-Marie, and good morning, everyone. So, as an introduction for the rest of the presentation this morning, we will continue with a presentation of a work that was carried out during this project, on which propose a methodology to characterize uses and their potential future interaction in a specific context, just in order to identify for them the best approaches for in MSP by developing targeted recommendations. So next slide, please. Well, thanks. First of all, I will come back very quickly on the activities we are talking about when we talk about uses at sea, and when we seek to maintain a coexistence between them in the long term, since this is one of the main objectives of the MSP. So several studies have already been carried out in the past on review the presentation of these activities, the current state and the future trends of these sectors according to different regions. And for more information on the subject, I can refer you in particular to the two previous studies of the SIM project, SIMNORAT and SIMCELT, which contain a detailed inventory of each activity, and also some works on future trends on the construction of scenarios. So for the SIMAtlantic project, a background review of this existing work was carried out, and this work was developed in order to have a state-of-the-art of uses on activities on the territory. The output of this task is structured in the form of a maritime sector fact sheet, presenting basic facts of each sector in the project area, of course, and providing additional sources of information. So next slide, please. Well, activities. So for this project, 9 activities were selected. I'm not going to give a detailed update because of the limited time today, but we can, however, separate them into 2 categories. The first of these categories is made up of historical activities. Some of these historical activities are considered to be in stagnation. This is notably the case of aquaculture and the aggregate extraction. Also, there are strong differences according to the region of these 2 activities. And there are also activities that can be considered in decline. This is the case with fishing or oil and gas exploitation. These 2 activities are notably concerned by policies to reduce the activity as part of the reduction of the fishing effort or the decarbonization of the member states. So next slide, please. And then there are a second category made up of activity globally in expansion. In these categories are also so-called old activities such as shipping or yachting, and also activity considered to be new or which are experiencing a great development, such as renewable marine energy, new leisure practice at sea, and even scientific research, which is experiencing a strong growth with the development of new studies around all other sectors of activities at sea. And then one of the objectives of the project is to work on the development of context-based evolution scenarios for these activities. So next slide, please. So of course, this first development trend based on the present observation on general economic or potential dynamics are not enough. It's the analysis of future trends of our activity on the definition of development scenarios require the consideration of more criteria, such as different legal regimes that influence relationships to place, forecast on resource demand, technological development, public perception, and many other contextual factors. So in the past, several projects have already made it possible to develop building scenarios. However, the study of activity over a large geographical area comes up against the difficulty of having precise data for each activity. Likewise, if the analysis of theoretical interaction is a useful tool to identify theoretical potential interaction, in real life, some of this conflict might not occur or might be punctual. For some of them, the solution may be found through management intervention, whilst others may have spatial implication. This is why this kind of analysis needs to be complemented by a context-based analysis, and as interaction on the other inputs are normally context and management-based and cannot be defined by a simple spatial overlapping. So this is a rationale behind the methodology developed by the Instituto Español de Oceanografía as part of the SIMAtlantic project. And I will now leave the hand to Christina, who will develop this methodology.
Thank you very much, Julien. So yes, as my colleague already mentioned, there is more to take into account when addressing activities interaction than just spatial distribution and trends and future trends, right? Because sometimes even we don't have that kind of knowledge. That's why we try to develop a methodology based on building a scenario. So we could use any qualitative information that we have to ask ourselves, what if we establish this activity here where there is already another activity happening? So this method is based in the premise that activities can be characterized and categorized based on different variables, internal variables and external ones, the ones based on the context. So how this works? We first try to, as I say, characterize the two uses based on the internal characteristic and the external conditioning factors. So starting by the internal characteristics, they depend on the very nature of the activity and the way it works. So they are likely not to change for the same activity regardless the region or the country. For example, long-term attitude. There are some activities that are normally proactive, while there are others that are conservative or more reactive. The scope of the actions that are activities like aquaculture that works at the local level, right? While maritime transport will work at the international level. Regarding resource usage, we can have exploitation, extraction, or even research conducted on the resource. And then there are these two last variables that are really related, because normally spatially explicit activities are also permanent, while spatially diffuse activities are time-bounded or seasonal. Then we go to the external conditioning factors, and we see these characteristics are context-based. They normally depend on the country, the region, and the governance and legislative framework established in that area. So for instance, public perception. The activity could be seen as attractive, tolerable, or really unattractive. There are also different kinds of relevance for the activities. Some could be strategically relevant, others economically relevant, and another ones culturally, socially, and historically relevant. Governance could act also at different scales for different activities in different places. So we could have from the local to the international level, but there are some activities that also have a mixed structure for their governance. And then we have dependency. Obviously, every activity depends on other factors, but it is important to see which is the most important dependency, because there are activities like transport that depend on other uses, that could be ports. There are activities really dependent on market fluctuations, while others depend really on the environment. And there are activities really dependent on technological developments nowadays. So once we have these two kind of characteristics already defined for each activity, we need to see how the values of all of them interact with each other. This way, we could see how which are the hotspots of the interaction. This matrix format is just to show you the rationale behind it. But this part of the assessment, you can address it as better suits you. Then you would see it is needed to keep in mind that some pair of characteristics might not have any relevant interaction, while sometimes various cells will provide the same or similar outputs, and this could be interpreted to weight this particular factor of the interaction. Then these cell outputs, these building blocks, could be also classified, for instance, into descriptors that will be those factors that define the interactions, the kind of interaction, who suffers the conflict, if it is a conflict or not. We could have also opportunities and risk. This way is easier to propose recommendations according to the descriptors, targeting risk and capitalizing in opportunities. But let's see with an example. Imagine that you have a place where there is already a fisheries activity happening, but there is an interest to build an offshore wind farm. Imagine that you have already conducted the first part of the assessment, so you have evaluated each activity for all the characteristics. And here you have the main outputs of the assessment. So on the one hand, we have offshore wind farms, that is a spatially explicit activity and is permanent. On the other hand, we have fisheries, that is a spatially diffuse activity and it is seasonal, it's not always there. So one of the hotspots is that we have a partial spatial conflict, but we don't exactly know when and where. These two factors are variable because one of the activities is moving. Then we have also the potential impact that could have the offshore wind farm in the environment. And we have fisheries that is dependent on the environment. So these will be the descriptors of this particular interaction. Therefore, the first recommendation to these building blocks will be the assessment of the extent of the conflict involving stakeholders and experts to know these gaps that we have in this interaction. Then we have an activity that is strategically relevant, that is wind energy. And on the other hand, we have fisheries that for this particular area is culturally, socially, and historically relevant. On the other hand, we have one activity whose governance works mostly at the national level. And then we have for fisheries a really complex governance structure. Here we can identify a risk, that is the scale mismatch and the different relevance criteria. And this would need really a nested approach to scales. But we also have an opportunity that is that both activities are considered at the MSP process. So MSP could be used as a launching platform. Then while conducting the analysis, there are other questions that we have to keep in mind. For instance, were there other processes addressing these interactions prior to the present analysis? And which were the results? And this should feed the whole assessment. And of course, it's really, really important to ask ourselves, has MSP the power and competency to apply the recommendation in this specific case? Because it might not. Keeping this in mind, in our example, the targeted recommendation could be the creation of a local working group of stakeholders and experts whose objectives will be the assessment of the space and time variables of the interaction, the assessment of the socioeconomic impacts, and the identification of potential alternatives. But of course, this, as any other method, has its limitations. So we also conducted a SWOT analysis, and these are some of the main outputs. For instance, the strengths of this methodology is that it really helps you to see where the conflict lies, so which is the driver of the conflict, and the kind of action needed. Then, on the other hand, as a weakness, it is that it is a qualitative judgment, and it will depend a lot of the person that is conducting the analysis, and that you can only address a pair of activities as it is right now. Then, as an opportunities, we have that is good for organize your thinking strategically and in a systematic way. And it considers aspects beyond the simple spatial overlap analysis or overlapping. And as I already said, the main thread will be that the recommended actions may fall out of MSP competencies. This was really a quick presentation, but if you want to know more about what Julian presented and the methodology, there is in the website the complete deliverable for this task, and also a separate handbook specifically for this methodology. And of course, I remain available for any question that you may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christina and Julian. And we will have time for questions at the end. So I think in the interest of time, we'll keep the questions to the end of the session, but I would encourage people to use the Q&A function and get your questions in there, and then I can pose them to the people involved. So moving on, the next presentation I would like to introduce is from Adriano Quintela, who is a marine biologist and environmental planner and a senior postdoc research fellow in the University of Aveiro in Portugal. And Adriano is going to talk to us about the development of a SIMAtlantic vision for MSP.
Good morning, everyone. So I will be okay. So good morning. My name is Adriano. I'm going to present a little bit of what has been the task of developing a SIMAtlantic vision for MSP and the work that we have conducted. So the idea since the beginning of the project is that we should produce an Atlantic vision for MSP, and this vision should take into account the common objectives of SIMAtlantic countries, and how this can be achieved in terms of the structures necessary and also the mechanisms, and also by identifying the key areas for sustained cross-border cooperation. The Atlantic vision for MSP will take the form of a roadmap outlining the common Atlantic objectives and structures. Of course, it was also based on the premise that given the local and national specificities of the region, a maritime spatial plan for all the Atlantic area is not appropriate. However, we also think that the common vision would help to ensure the policy coherence in the region. So As it was also already mentioned by Anne-Marie in the opening presentation, all the building of the project was made in a way that all the cross-cutting themes, such as governance, data use and sharing, cumulative effects within cross-border strategic environmental assessment, and the land-sea interactions, would contribute to this Atlantic vision. Of course, each of one of these themes is fed by one case study. So the idea is that instead of creating a empirical, theoretical and utopic vision, we would create a vision based on the gaps identified for each of the cross-cutting themes, and try to create actions or to propose actions to mitigate these gaps. So the Atlantic vision for MSP was built upon the previous the deliverables of this work package, which was basically the presentation that we've seen before this one. The current uses and needs for the Atlantic region, also the implementation of MSP in Atlantic countries, and also the work done by Anne-Marie in terms of governance, how European legal objectives can be incorporated into MSP process, how MSP governance structures at the transboundary level should be involved, and also the potential creation of an Atlantic MSP cooperation group. So, of course, in order to create an Atlantic vision or a vision for a sea basin, we need to first analyze the sea basin and regional strategies for the ocean. That was what we did. And also to analyze the national strategies and the visions for the national MSPs. So this way we will have three levels of analysis for the creation of this vision. The first one is the national level, which is basically, as I said, the national strategies and the national visions for MSP. We will have a wider level, which is the regional level. And for this level, I think we thought that it's very important to analyze the strategy for the Atlantic Action Plan 2.0, and also the strategy for the OSPAR environment to 2020-2030. And in the end, we will also have the more practical level, which is the project level, which is basically the contributions of each of the cross-cutting themes. So in terms of the connection to the Atlantic strategy, we identify that the action plan goes a little bit beyond the theme of maritime spatial planning. I think this was true in the previous version of the Atlantic strategy, and I think that there is a notorious effort in this new generation of the strategy to mitigate this issue. So the action plan should therefore place a greater emphasis on the importance of MSP for the development of the economy, and this is particularly true for the pillars 1, 2, and 4. I think that it's very important that in order to maximize the economic potential of the Atlantic, to include MSP. So in terms of international partnerships, while it is understood that the development of blue economy is aimed at promoting projects in the area, the action plan should draw the broad guidelines for increase the partnerships in the transatlantic context. In terms of the OSPAR, I think the most important thing and the most notorious thing was that, in fact, DOSPAR vision lacks the blue growth concept in the transboundary maritime spatial planning. So in terms of the national level, we identified the common principles shared between the SIMAtlantic countries. And those are, for example, the application of the ecosystem-based approach to create a more efficient and rational use of the maritime space, to provide the means to articulate policies and activities, enable a better understanding of the cumulative effects, enable a better efficiency in terms of decision making. They all share the principle of promoting the participation of stakeholders. They all have the principle of providing a framework to implementation of MSP, to facilitate the coordination between other governance tools, embrace the existing and future maritime uses. They all should be based on the best available information and evidence. They should contain a hierarchy of spatial scales and provide a strategic and efficiency and thereby a cost-effective approach to information. So now we are going more into the detail of what were the gaps identified in all of the cross-cutting themes, and here I'm just going to give you some examples, not only of the gaps, but also the actions that we think are important to take in order to mitigate those gaps, and this action should be the core of our vision for MSP. So in terms of governance, one of the things is that we identified that there is no explicit Atlantic mechanism for MSP. In terms of the work back, the cross-cutting theme, cumulative impacts, we identified that, in fact, there in the Atlantic regional level, there is no common methodology, which is very important if we want to have a wider perspective and a better knowledge of the impacts of MSP processes in the Atlantic. In terms of data sharing, despite of the fact that there is a huge amount of effort done during the years, not only in previous projects, but also in terms of European Union initiatives such as the Inspiring the Directive, there are still a lot of gaps. And for example, there is an abundant amount of data that are held in different places. There is a limited knowledge of what exists and where, and normally the platforms of the information are very focused on the national systems. In terms of land-sea interactions, the land-sea interactions can be transboundary, and in their influence, this makes it more difficult to assess in terms of MSP. So in terms of the actions, for example, for the land-sea interactions, the SIMAtlantic project developed a method and gives some examples for addressing land-sea in the MSP process. So this is one of the things that we should include in our vision. So for in terms of governance, we know that there are no explicit Atlantic mechanisms. So we looked on ways on how cooperation is dealt in within other policy areas, and we came up with ways of how this could be amended and to further meet the objectives of MSP. In terms of data sharing, as I said, there are a lot of data, but little attention was paid to adjoining areas and there is a limited operability. So SIMAtlantic addressed this through the geoportal, and we also think that to the geoportal that we that was created in the project, and you will see further during the day. Actually, you will see during the day more about all of these issues. So we also think that EMODNet has also a role here, but arguably there are still gaps at the national systems that don't include the adjoining areas, and but we would point out they should point out to other portals and sources and where they exist. In terms of cumulative impacts, there is we made a proposal in the case study that you will see, and I will invite you to see this presentation of a methodology that could assess the cumulative impacts at a transboundary scale, and hopefully this methodology should be improved in a way that it's accepted by the countries of the Atlantic area. And this way we in terms of what is expected for the vision, I think the creation of the vision itself should raise awareness of the emerging issues and communicating benefits on MSP. Should also enable cross-sectoral and multi-level coordination between different authorities and address sectors and issues. Should engage stakeholders and capacity building, particularly where MSP is a new process, as we all know, and will also provide a long-term focus for MSP that may exceed political cycles. Should also it's also very important in accounting for future uses that are still not present currently present, and also to achieve a better land sea integration of planning. And I think that this way, if the process continues beyond the SIMAtlantic project, the creation of or the work on a vision for MSP in the Atlantic, it's the proper forum to create a sense of Atlanticism that it's so important to the development of the MSP in the Atlantic. So this is basically it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adriano. And I think the presentation captures just a lot of the complexity involved in MSP as a process, and I'm sure it gives people lots of food for thought in terms of questions. It also leads nicely on to our next presentation from Juan Ronco. Juan is a policy officer on blue economy and maritime spatial planning at DG Mare in the European Commission, and we're delighted to welcome Juan to speak this morning. So over to you, Juan.
Hi, thanks, Anne-Marie. So I will share my presentation with you. I hope it works. Is it okay?
Yeah, that's working perfectly for me.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so I have been asked to, so first of all, thanks for the organizers for inviting me. In fact, I am jumping in for my boss, Felix Leinemann, who is the head of unit in DG Maritime Affairs and Fisheries, the unit covering maritime spatial planning, but also what we call blue economy sectors and aquaculture. So I have been asked, I was asked to talk and give the European Commission's perspective on a vision for maritime spatial planning in the Atlantic. I think it's I added this words maritime spatial planning. It's a vision for the Atlantic, but I think that maritime spatial planning is key to achieve this vision, of course. Okay, so let me. I will speak about I would say frameworks that should. I am not saying determined, but will guide this vision. Sorry. So I will start with perhaps the highest possible framework. So the UN SDGs for 2030. I think we have to keep in mind that these objectives are very relevant for many initiatives, in particular in the Atlantic. So I think all these goals are relevant. But of course, we got SDG 14, life below water, that is especially relevant for and important for the marine environment, and the Atlantic. Is in terms of size, is a huge marine environment. So it's very relevant for the Atlantic. If you look at more closely at SDG 14, I think all these targets are also very relevant for the Atlantic. Ranging from reducing marine pollution to the last one, which is increase economic benefits from sustainable use of marine resources. So all these targets are extremely relevant, and the maritime spatial planning plays a role in achieving those targets. So the spatial determination of activities, how they interact or should interact, is critical for the achievement of some of these goals. Even if you look at target 14.6, which is end subsidies contributing to overfishing, I was involved in a previous life at DG Mare in these negotiations at the World Trade Organization, and the special considerations play a role. I mean, because if fisheries management is properly done, there may be some exceptions provided, or some exceptions be provided for the provision of support to the fishing sector. So very relevant for these targets. Now we have the European Green Deal. I wrote in my slide that this is putting into motion the 2030 SDGs in the EU. So you see there in green these boxes describing, or I would say setting out what the European Union will do in the next years to achieve these targets. And again, the European Green Deal, these targets or these initiatives, better said, are relevant for the Atlantic. Some of these initiatives are very closely related to maritime spatial planning as well. If you look at, for instance, preserving and restoring ecosystems and biodiversity, well, maritime spatial planning plays a role. For instance, by integrating marine protected areas. This is an interesting discussion. I mean, marine protected areas exist or are being set up, and there will be more and more. If we want to comply with this 30% target of protected protected areas of the total surface in the European Union, in tune with what is going to be agreed perhaps at the next conference of the parties of the Conference on Biodiversity, and 10% of these areas with strict conservation measures. So we need proper maritime spatial planning from farm to fork. Again, we have we need food to be produced in a sustainable manner, and aquaculture can play a role. And again, maritime spatial planning will help or contribute to that. I will say perhaps a bit more on this later on. Smart mobility, again, so efficient maritime corridors, and then in energy, building and renovating an energy and resource efficient way. So sorry, building and renovating, no, excuse me, not this one exactly, but supplying clean, affordable and secure energy. So offshore wind energy, and in general marine renewable energy, because we can get energy from waves, from currents. So this will play a role in the decarbonization of the economy. And MSP, again, maritime spatial planning, is needed to provide sufficient space for the generation of energy in a manner that is compliant with conservation targets and goals. And so this leads me to the next slide about the sustainable blue economy. So what is this? Yes. I heard Adriano speaking about blue growth, so that in the OSPAR strategy there was no mention of blue growth, or or lack of consideration for blue growth. The blue growth strategy was launched by the Commission in 2012, but since then things have evolved, changed, and the focus is now, or the shift is now, to the what we call the sustainable blue economy. So the sustainable blue economy is about a number of things. You see here in this blue not boxes, but two areas with text in it. You see these areas of, I would say, action. And so the Commission issued a communication in, I think it was May of this year, where it announced that it will take a number of initiatives to bring about this sustainable blue economy, or to help bring about the sustainable blue economy in the EU. And again, you see that some of these initiatives in light blue, in text in light blue, here in the slide, are connected to maritime spatial planning. We got maritime spatial planning 2.0 on the top right of the slide. So you know that the EU has what we call a directive, which is a framework law. And this directive requires member states, so EU countries, to prepare maritime spatial plans. Member states have to be ready by this year. Well, that was a deadline which is passed, but member states are working on maritime spatial plan. I mean, there are some who are ready, some that are working on it, and we will have to reflect on what next in terms of maritime spatial planning. So what issues maritime spatial planning should address? We got, for instance, climate change. That's a matter perhaps for this maritime spatial planning 2.0 exercise. Algae, that's something interesting, and for this we will perhaps need space. sea-basing strategies. In here again, the Atlantic is a candidate for. There is a sea-basing strategy, but maritime spatial planning could play a role in reinforcing this strategy, or making it more, I would say, robust in terms of perhaps structures or aims and goals. I will go to the next slide. The Atlantic Action Plan. I think this was already mentioned by Adriano, stressing that some of the pillars here were more relevant than others for the Atlantic strategy. Sorry, for the vision, for the vision in the Atlantic. Yeah. So this Atlantic Action Plan is a kind of I would say menu, if I can put it that way, of areas where work can be done to achieve a sustainable Atlantic, I would say, marine economy, marine environment, even at social level. We have goals 3 and 4 on quality education, training and lifelong learning, and ocean literacy. So as I mentioned in my slide, it serves as basis and inspiration for initiatives in the Atlantic. So the Atlantic vision that will come out of this project, I am sure that it will integrate some of the elements of the, and taking into account some of the elements of this strategy. Excuse me. And now I want to be perhaps a bit provocative, and so this vision that was sketched by and outlined by Adriano, it's great, but I think that it should be also put in a way that is understood, or that can be visioned or visualized. And then I took some examples here which relate to maritime spatial planning. I took this one from Wageningen, from the University of Wageningen, about the Netherlands, what could be the Netherlands, or how the Netherlands could look like in 2120, so in 2120. And you see there a very well changed territorial part of the Netherlands, and you see there above, so the marine environment with different uses. So this gives you a kind of flavor of how the Netherlands could look like from 100 years from now. There is another one that I took from Belgium. It's not about maritime spatial planning, it's more about the coastal zone management. But I think that this is also inspiring. So you see, these are 4 scenarios. The one where artificial islands are being built along the coast to protect the coastal area from sea level rise. Scenario 2, archipelago. So you let in the sea, and then you have some sort of inland archipelago. Scenarios 3, you just cut the coast into 2, and then you protect one part. So on the left with Ostend and these islands protecting, and Zeebrugge, and the port of Zeebrugge protecting the coast, and the other one you just let the nature do, and you see that in fact the part of the coast is flooded. And then the 4th is about a mosaic. So you you just channel the water inland, and then you create areas where the water can be channeled. Well, this is perhaps the most conservative scenario vis-a-vis the 3 others, which are pretty radical. This created a bit of upheaval in coastal areas in in Belgium, mayors of some of the cities were a bit upset with this, but at least this is, I think, a good thinking exercise. And then this is one of the North Sea in 2070, and you see how the sea is being used. So with structures, you see wind parks, some floating harbors, areas for leisure. So this is also a rather inspiring vision, I would say. So what for the Atlantic? What is what vision from the Atlantic? I mean, from Commission side, what would we expect? So vision that is coherent with these SDGs, with implementation of the Green Deal, that delivers a sustainable blue economy and that contributes to achieve the goals of the Atlantic Action Plan. I would add, as Commission, as DG Mare, that the vision also should help in achieving the goals of this directive, of the Maritime Spatial Planning Directive in the European Union. Well, we got our neighbors across the channel, or part of them, who left the European Union. But I think that the objectives and aims for maritime spatial planning are pretty much aligned. So the vision, I think the vision you are working on is taking into account the fact that there is an alignment, there is a common aim in terms of maritime spatial planning at both ends or sides of the channel to achieve these objectives and have a vision that brings, with the aid of maritime spatial planning, brings the Atlantic into a future which is sustainable on the three pillars, so environmentally, economically, and social. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Juan, and I don't mind a bit of provocation, so I think we can come back to some of your points in the panel. And it's very interesting, actually, to see those maps and see the way things could potentially change in the next 100 years. So I definitely think with the effects of climate change, it's something that marine spatial planning is going to have to think a little bit more about. And we also need to think about how to make our vision more visible. So it leads also, your example from the North Sea leads nicely on to our final presenter this morning, who is Patricia Enyett. Patricia has lots and lots of international, European and national experience on the governance of marine areas, particularly integrated approaches. And she is here today as the MSP focal point for the North Sea. So I think it's useful for all of us to get a perspective from a different sea basin and the experiences that they've had there in MSP implementation and in their transboundary context as well. So over to you, Patricia.
Thank you so much, Anne-Marie, for this introduction, and good morning to all of you. On behalf of the MSPS mechanism, thank you very much for the invitation, and it's my absolute pleasure to share with you some insights on the experience in the North Sea in the implementation of MSP, and also in the transboundary context. As mentioned today, in Europe we have the MSP directive, and I think everybody knows who is participating here. And the European Commission has established the MSPS mechanism with the role to support member states and DG Mare in the implementation of the MSP directive. Next slide, please. What we do, next slide, please. It works. Yeah. What we do is we provide support to member states in the respective European sea basins by direct assistance, preparing background technical studies, organizing workshops on MSP and the meetings of the EU MSP expert working group for member states and DG Mare. And what's very important is that the mechanism is driven by the request from EU member states, depending on the needs nationally and the transboundary context. Therefore, we maintain very close dialogue with all member states regarding the support required for the preparation of the MSPs, and we have received a total of 33 requests for technical assistance from member states. These requests cover a wide range of needs, including support to the organization of MSP consultation, and also technical requests that some of them have resulted in the preparation of handbooks such as the MSP Communication Handbook, which we ran as a webinar together with MSP Global earlier this year. Well, on the European MSP platform, you can find all information. The website is on the slide. It is a EU-wide database of MSP information that also includes the country and sea basin profiles detailed description. And final to mention, in Europe, we have since last year the EU Technical Expert Group on Data for MSP that addresses the data needs and flow of consolidating information for the practitioners and authorities, MSP authorities, and the recommendations that are being prepared, they will be published very soon. Next slide, please. I will talk today about the experiences in the North Sea, which is a basin with many strong economies and one of the most heavily used seas in the world. The blue growth potential of the North Sea is high. Today, territorial waters of the North Sea contain the highest concentration of offshore wind farms in the European Union. It is also a sea basin with largest and busiest ports of Europe, just to mention Rotterdam, Antwerp, Hamburg, and Bremen, Bremerhaven. But the North Sea is also about close cultural links between the nations inhabiting this basin and a general spirit of working together at the level of countries, as is in the Netherlands, historically facing flat risk and heavy constant collaboration of communication on this matter, and also in the transboundary context, the transboundary level, for instance, in response to marine degradation and climate crisis, with example of the North Sea political cooperation on offshore wind. Well, the next slide, please. Here I want to show you how the North Sea is crowded. In a slide, you can see a map on the right-hand side showing existing and planned wind farms in the North Sea. The EU offshore renewable energy strategy has plans for a 25-fold increase in offshore wind capacity by 2050 with a 5-fold increase by 2030. And governments in the North Sea keep on increasing their offshore renewable energy developments. In this slide, you can also see the maps representing AIS vessel tracking data from Germany, Denmark, Netherlands, and Belgium. And you can clearly see how busy in shipping are the territorial waters of all these member states. And there are also other activities in the sea, in the North Sea. And well, in general, the North Sea is crowded, is overcrowded, to the point that there are multiple uses of marine areas and the demand for marine space is rising, with many activities leading to the conflicts of offshore renewables, nature, shipping, energy platforms, and infrastructure, coastal protection, and taking space from the sea, among others. The North Sea countries recognized long ago that the territorial waters are becoming too crowded, and that in order to manage this and sustainably use marine resources, they need planning and management approaches for coastal areas, marine coastal areas. Then the countries started developing the marine planning and management plans quite early, these processes. When the EU MSP directive entered into force in 2014, the member states from the North Sea, for instance, Belgium, Netherlands, Germany, already had in place some form of MSP, including processes and governance established for integrated holistic management. And the countries also have been collaborating on common approaches towards marine management through the Regional Sea Convention, OSPAR. Next slide, please. And I also would like to mention about the technologies and innovative approaches that are being developed in the North Sea for space sharing and conflict resolving, including artificial islands, energy islands, multi-uses, so coexistence of activities such as offshore renewable energy structures with aquaculture, seaweed farming, oyster farming that contribute to restoring natural ecosystems, and at the same time they ensure food security. We had the first example of multi-use in the German Bight in the North Sea, and in general the North Sea's MSPs, they foresee multiple use, such as the possibility of use of wind farm areas for aquaculture in Belgium. Now, the zero carbon goal steers the development and large-scale activities, including artificial energy islands. In Denmark last year, the parliament passed the new Climate Act, and 2 artificial energy islands in the North Sea and the Baltic Sea will be developed 2 gigawatt to connect from the wind farms, and after 2030, the energy islands will be supporting at least 10 gigawatt. Now, currently in the Danish MSP plan, there's the area of 1,000 square kilometer, so it's to be investigated, and this big area is designated for the energy islands in the North Sea. Now, in the Netherlands, that's on the right-hand side, a Dutch energy network developed plans to build artificial energy islands with one built power grid hub in the shallow area in the middle of the North Sea, from where it would send electricity over a long-distance cable to a number of the North Sea countries. The Dutch MSP is open to such developments in the future, and the artificial islands are also to give more space by proclaiming a land reclamation and to protect the coastline. The Dutch have been, well, we have today a lot of examples from the Netherlands, I see, but the Dutch have been indeed very innovative in this regards. There come the famous polders, and also see at the bottom of the slide, there's a picture of a big island, the Flevopolder, that is the largest island formed by reclaimed land in the world. So coastal protection and taking space from the sea also leads to giving land back to sea for compensation. Now, facing crowded space at sea on one hand and increasing demands of users and activities at sea, they lead to various developments in the North Sea, very innovative. Therefore, consideration of coherent planning of MSP to preserve space for future users is deeply embedded in the North Sea countries, especially that with the energy transition targets and decarbonization, there will be as well new uses in addition to the traditional maritime uses. And for example, a potential hydrogen pipeline infrastructure in the North Sea connecting all the North Sea countries. Hydrogen transportation and storage infrastructure is becoming an important dialogue in the North Sea, like transmitting and reusing to hydrogen infrastructure by Shell and Rijkswaterstaat in the Netherlands, giving a second purpose to the Dutch-owned platforms. So that you can see in the article on the left side. And finally, the carbon dioxide storage areas, they are being designated in the North Sea. And that's, for example, the case of the Danish MSP, which appointed areas now for, well, that's in the North Sea. Therefore, this storage use is anticipated and included in the MSP, but a database of all special uses of the North Sea under MSP is recognized as a foundation of future developments and technological advances in the basin. Now, in terms of the process, that will be the next slide, please. I will very briefly go through the countries. All these countries you can see in the slide, EU members, they submitted their MSP plans. Very briefly, the Danish MSP was finalized and launched in March 2021. The plan has issued a digital executive order and is legally binding map of the Danish waters. It went into consultation and the consultation will finish this month. Belgium had its first national MSP already in 2014. Last year, a second MSP of Belgium entered into force that covers a period until 2026. And the plan will be reviewed every 6 years and is legally binding. The Netherlands had its first MSP back in 2009. Second, in 2016, that is valid until now. Now the third MSP as part of the program North Sea 2022-2027 is currently being finalized and public consultation will last until next week. The formal adoption of the North Sea program is expected in March next year. The North Sea program is an annex to the National Water Program. It's quite complicated. It sounds complicated, but it's not that complicated. It's just a part of a bigger document. And it is a self-binding policy document for spatial development in the sea. In addition, the Netherlands also has the North Sea Agreement that was adopted by Parliament early this year. Now, all these works have led to the establishment of a permanent North Sea Council in the Netherlands and the development of the Community of Practice North Sea for bringing interested stakeholders parties together for the topic of offshore wind energy, nature conservation, and seafood production. Finally, Germany was revisiting MSP and it has been completed last summer after 2 rounds of national and international consultations, and the plan entered into force 2 weeks ago. The new plan coordinates various uses within the EEZ, and the special plans is binding. And in addition, there are also coastal plans in Germany, 2 for the North Sea, Schleswig-Holstein, Lower Saxony are now in revisions. Now, that's just very briefly about these plans. You can find all information on the European MSP platforms with links to the relevant national documents. I also would like to highlight that this MSP consider many other relevant frameworks and plans of the European Union, for example, the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, Natura 2000, and work closely together and links with drafting policy and documents on MSP and MSFD. These MSP plans consider the international regulations, conventions such as UNCLOS and ESPO conventions, ESPO being a Convention on Environmental Impact Assessment in a transboundary context, and UNCLOS is the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. I will give some details about the process in a second, but let us go also to the next countries in the North Sea. Sweden has a very small part, is in the process of finalizing the MSP, and the government is currently preparing the Marine Spatial Plan for adoption. France conducted the public consultation on the 4 action plans, including the 4 designated MSP, which is the Document Stratégique de Façade, DSD. That is the national implementation of MSP, jointly with the environmental implementation of MSFD. The public consultation was closed last month and several meetings were organized. UK, as the ex-member of the EU, started working on MSP, and for example, in England, there are 4 plans. They were developed at the same time between 2016 and 21. Marine planning is evidence-based and follows a cycle. There are also marine special plans in Scotland and Wales. And finally, Norway uses MSP to integrate its major maritime activities with nature conservation. There is the 2009 Nature Management Act and Marine Resources Act that provide the overall legal framework for the management of marine areas and actions. And from 3 considered areas in the Norwegian plan, there is 1 in the North Sea and Skagerrak, which are strongly influenced by human activities. That's why it's of high importance to the transboundary collaboration in the region. Now, in terms of the process, that will be the next step. Under the EU directive, in a slide, you can see a time frame with the steps. EU member states through the MSP regulatory framework apply a stepwise approach. This process includes working with stakeholders, partner agencies, organizations, integrating the data, building and sustaining planning for the implementation process, implementation, monitoring, and evaluating MSP. And this process uses a number of technologies, for example, for data collection and information sharing. This year was a deadline for the submission of MSP by member states. In the slides at the bottom left corner, you can see the steps in the planning process in Germany. In the interest of time, I will not go into details of it, but would like to highlight the integrated stakeholder and public consultation that took place in Germany that included cross-border consultation when the plan was likely to have a significant effects on the environment of other member states. Stakeholders representing different sectors when consulted at different steps of the MSP, and Germany carried national and international transboundary consultation, the first draft plan, and CA was followed by national and international consultation, and then the revised MSP plan and report was again followed by such consultations. There was a vast representation of member states from both the North Sea and the Baltic Sea, since the German MSP concerns EEZs of these both seas. Now, in terms of interactions between sectors, and because Christina earlier had it in her presentation, I will perhaps give this example of Germany. Germany developed 3 possible scenarios. Planning alternatives, you can see them in a slide in the center on the right. These planning alternatives each had a different focal point that were shipping, energy, and nature conservation. In each scenario, maximum requirements of sectors were mapped, and the purpose of it was basically to overlay these and analyze conflicts of use, or so-called hotspots. This delivered initial planning options, were a base for the technical discussions, comments, scoping meetings that have led to the first draft in Germany. And that first draft had then undergone the technical discussions, comments, and consultations, and covers a number of topics. In Germany also uses the international law as UNCLOS, for example, for the matter of safety and efficiency of navigation. The process of MSP development and implementation took countries a lot of time. It was quite intensive process, but the process they went through is also as important as the MSP plan itself, because this process has brought stakeholders together. It enabled legislative and administrative connectivity, coordination, monitoring, assessment, and reporting, and also improvements in management approaches. I will give 2 brief examples here. During the process of MSP development, the data challenge was faced by member states. There was the unharmonized data across sea basins and member states, and to tackle it, last year the European Commission established the EU Technical Expert Group on Data for MSP that addresses these issues, and the recommendations will be published soon. Secondly, the MSP process can also serve as an incentive for the development of site management plans, as it was done in Belgium and the Netherlands. In Belgium, work for the country's first MSP led to stronger regulations in one marine protection site, while in the Netherlands, the process to develop the country's first MSP has led to the identification of new protection sites and the development of management plans for some existing sites. Well, I will finish here about the process, and I would like to highlight the next very important aspect, transboundary collaboration, which is the next slide. As mentioned earlier, the North Sea has strong transboundary context due to cultural traditions, societal connectivity, and well, we have the hybrid economic dependency of the North Sea countries. The sectoral and economical connectivity make countries collaborate to overcome the issues and challenges in the sea basin. And these issues can be various, including climate change and related sea acidification, long-term transboundary pollution, the decline in seabird population, and so on. Now, important aspect is also the establishment of ecosystem-based MSP that continues to be a focus area of MSP authorities in the North Sea, given we have the EU biodiversity strategy. And the member states in the North Sea have rather very limited space for allocation of, well, there's again not maybe the conflict, but well, the allocation of these areas in the sea basins, that there are needed common approaches. Now, next slide, please. I'm trying to hurry up to speed up a bit. I see Anne-Marie on the screen.
We might have to cover some of this in the questions, Patricia.
Exactly. Yeah, we basically have, yes, the EU legislative context. We have the international context. We have the transboundary collaboration and the pressure footprints context. And in the slide, you see already the aspects which were mentioned. So the countries exchange as part of the MSP process, but they also collaborate bilaterally and in bigger country groups on practical sectoral issues related to the international activities such as shipping, pipelines, energy, and impacts of offshore wind farms. Now, the example of such sectoral transboundary collaboration in the North is the North Sea Energy Cooperation that was established to facilitate cost-effective deployment of offshore renewable energy and stimulate collaboration in the sea basin. And there is also an ongoing shipping collaboration. Another example, another important aspect is OSPAR that was already mentioned today. There is the CPMR North Sea Commission, and other than that, there is no North Sea strategy as in other EU sea basins, and still in the North Sea, the countries managed to find ways to effectively collaborate in transboundary context, which largely relates to the similarity, and I would like to highlight it, similarity of faced issues, technical pragmatism, cultural links, as well as many, many years of joint work, familiarity, and trust gained between authorities through these projects. Next slide, please. These are examples of projects. In the upper part of the slide, you can see the regional projects where the authorities participated. It's the North Sea project addressing shipping, and the Sanse project addressing wind farms. There is now the upcoming project EMSP, Emerging Ecosystem-Based MSP Topics in North Sea and Baltic Sea, coordinated by the Netherlands, that aims at promoting future coherence and providing opportunity to strengthen the transboundary collaboration between two sea basins. Next slide, please. Finally, I would like to show the example from the Wadden Sea on the transboundary collaboration. This is the Wadden Sea. It's a very pristine environment. It is the largest unbroken system of intertidal sand and mudflats in the world. To maintain the critical ecological processes, there has been established the trilateral Wadden Sea cooperation that provides the overall framework for three countries. It's the Netherlands, Germany, and Denmark. Now, the offshore wind farms are in the proximity to the islands. The big containers pass through the southern shipping route next to the islands. They have been coexisting there. And above the Wadden Sea, there is also two internationally designed shipping routes. Now, 2 years ago, there happened a very big accident in 2019 during a severe storm The container ship lost more than 8,000 containers on board, and it ended up on the islands of the World Heritage. Now, there was the whole research about what has happened in the area. You can see the picture how the beach looked like at the down of the slide. A number of phenomena that has led to this situation, created it, that there were also the research going into what has happened in the area, why the ship collapsed, but basically the effective management of this precious environment in the land sea areas needs to ensure an ecosystem approach to integrate the management of ecosystem protected areas. Now, I will give just one example on the next slide. The Netherlands has developed integrated management plan. I'm finishing, yes. Of the Wadden Islands is integrated with MSP in the Netherlands. I will skip all the details, but I would like to highlight that why I decided basically to show this example is because the fragmentation happens in relation to MSP and land sea interactions, which here are presented in a transboundary context, and to highlight also the importance of reliable meteorological and oceanographic forecast for decision-making on planning routes and developments at sea. And in the final slide, you have some concluding remarks, which perhaps I will leave in a slide for the sake of the time. But similar issues in the North Sea and the understanding by countries have been enhancing transboundary collaboration and coordination there. Institutional collaboration and coordination, decision-making processes are at similar levels, and that were also the enablers for the collaboration, transboundary collaboration in the sea basin. Ensuring coherence and coordination of MSP across the sea basin that is learned in the projects, sectoral cooperation is extremely important. And my final point is on generating knowledge by OSPAR, academia, and researchers for informing decision-making process in planning with the mandate to collaborate and coordinate maritime planning under the MSP framework. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and apologies for rushing you there at the end. If I could ask the speakers just to turn on their cameras, please, and I'll have some short questions, hopefully, because we are nearly out of time. It strikes me from all the presentations this morning, just the variety of interactions that are going on. And I thought, Christina, that might be of relevance for your methodology. And I just wanted to ask, has your methodology actually been tried in real life anywhere? Or are there plans to do that? If you could just comment on that briefly, please.
Well, for the sake of developing the methodology, we actually try in a virtual test. It is not real, but actually it's becoming real because the example I show about fisheries and offshore wind farms is becoming a reality, because at the end, offshore wind farms are going to be installed in our waters. So, but yeah, the prospect is to continue developing the methodology and test it, if possible, in new, in real cases, and of course, if possible, in new projects. That would be the ideal thing.
Okay, thank you. My next question is really for Juan. You mentioned a lot of the different policy goals and the objectives at global, European, and everything, and European level as well. And it strikes me that there's a need for a lot of cooperation to deliver on all of these various objectives. And I was just wondering, from your perspective and the Commission, have you given any thought as to how you will assess the kind of cooperation or the coherence between plans, if that's not too nasty a question at this time of the morning?
No, it's not a nasty question, and it's a very relevant and to the point question. Well, if you look at the text of the MSP directive, there is member states are asked, required to cooperate. They can do it in different ways, even taking advantage of existing organizations or structures. Or yes, we will assess. We will look at how the directive has been implemented, and of course, the maritime spatial plans are the key element for the implementation of the directive. So we will see how the plans how they are coherent. Well, in a sea basin context, I think that's the first step. But also overall in the EU, because there are matters that go beyond a cross-border or sea basin context. For instance, in terms of process or in terms of how issues have been considered. For instance, if you take ecosystems-based approach, because everything is interconnected also across sea basins. So the North Sea is connected with the Atlantic and even the Baltic. So we will see at how these plans have been set up and how what type of coherence has been achieved in terms of these big subjects, I would say. But sea basin cooperation and sea basin coherence will be one of the main, I would say, gauges to check coherence.
Okay, that's interesting, and might provide some food for thought for those of us thinking about future research projects.
Yeah.
So thanks for that. Adriano, I wanted to ask quickly if you'd come across any examples of visions that take transboundary issues into account specifically.
Yeah, I think you mean visions, the visions for other areas.
Yeah.
So I think the most known, the most successful case for me, it's the Baltic Sea vision, and of course this vision of the Baltic was made in a common and shared MSP exercise. So it's quite different from what should be expected from a vision that it's provided from a project such as ours, and this is also kind of an answer to the provocation of Juan, which I appreciate, by the way. Of course, it's different if we want to build a vision for a country or for a sea basin, if it's made within the process of a project such as ours or in a more institutional way. And I think that it's important to realize that this vision that we propose is just a stepping stone. It's the first step towards the vision. I think it's very important to pick up on the work that we have done and further discuss it in a more institutional way with stakeholders, with promoters of sectorial activities, also to increase awareness and to show the future trends in terms of maritime activities, because it's the proper way to communicate the benefits of MSP process and also to stimulate public debates.
Okay, thank you. And finally, Patricia, and I suppose Juan as well, some of your maps from the North Sea created some interest in the chat and in the Q&A, so lots of people were commenting on those and where they came from. I don't know, Patricia, if you would be prepared to answer because it's very country specific, but does the Netherlands and Belgium and their maps take climate change scenarios into account? Do you know that, or is that something that we'll follow up on in the Padlet maybe?
Well, yes, that's the southern part of the North Sea, and the Netherlands, for example, has been under the impact of the climate change and the flooding for centuries. So this is included in the plan. This adaptive management is a common approach in the Netherlands. So therefore, these considerations are included, and I would say in the EU scale, the plans, for instance, the MSP plan from the Netherlands is one of these plans that definitely addresses this. But that's also due to the long-term tradition of works in the Netherlands on this issue.
And just finally, to give you the last word maybe of the session, is would you have any suggestions from your experiences in the North Sea for those of us in the Atlantic who are slightly, well, some of us are a little behind, will we say?
Yeah, I'm always when I see presentations from the EU projects, I'm overwhelmed by how many issues can be included. And I think on the practical side, I would focus. I think the North Sea is very much on the practical side, is to scale down, is to narrow down the issues. The marine coastal system is very complex, and as much as the decision-making process, the decision makers, they require this complex knowledge. It serves as a background information for planners who, in the transboundary context, I think should narrow down as well these issues to be able to address them fully. And then also provides this example: the EU projects, they were focused by the regional authorities, were focused on the shipping and energy, and that's also where further implemented in the scenarios of, for instance, of Germany that I showed. Was shipping, energy, and the environment, and the focus of the EMSP project for the North Sea and Baltic Sea is also focused on this. It's a triangular of this food, energy, and shipping. That's for the North Sea. So I think that would also be perhaps helpful for Atlantic. There are different issues, different concerns, but also to narrow it down a little bit in the strategies. And finally, to add to it, to look also at the consultation process, at the stakeholder engagement as something of an added value, and not as a legislative obligation under certain policy frameworks. There are very good examples, for instance, from Finland, where for the stakeholder engagement, they use the future scenarios under the MSP, and that has brought a lot of, this innovative tool also brought a lot of input to the development of the MSP.
Okay, thank you. And it leads nicely on, actually, because one of the parallel sessions starting at 11 is on kind of data sharing and stakeholder aspects. So I think that might be relevant to what you're just saying there. With that, I am going to say that any of the questions maybe that we haven't answered, we can continue the discussions on the Padlet, and Joanna had put the link to that into the chat earlier, so maybe follow up there. But for now, I just want to say thank you very much to the speakers for their comprehensive presentations, and also for the learnings, I think, that are relevant to us as a project as well. So thank you. And just a reminder that the next sessions begin at 11, depending on which session you have registered for. The links will be in an email sent to you. So thank you very much, everyone.